We still do 7 NUFC Matters show a week for free. But if you want to help support NUFC Matters, then there are a few ways of doing it. Hit the like button on each live broadcast and video. This helps the channel grow. Hit the subscribe button and select the all notifications bell so you don't miss a single show. If you want to help us financially, then you can join the channel using this button with the membership starting at $1.99 a month. Or you can drop us a donation in the chat using a super sticker. We're also looking for sponsors. If you'd like your brand advertised on the flyers for the show and featured during the ad break, then email John at nufcmatters.com to arrange today.
Attack. It feels like I've been talking to myself again, but it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on the thoughts I cannot say to you if I don't say the words that make...
Good morning, welcome to NUFC Matters with me, Steve Wraith. This is the Eddie Howe press conference for the game away at Wolverhampton Wanderers today. And as always, Eddie Howe gave his press conference on Friday morning in front of a packed media room. First up was Matthew Raisbeck, affectionately known as Razor from BBC Radio Newcastle. And he asked about Tonali. The ban, of course, had been announced in the media. And he wanted to know what Eddie Howe's reaction was. Eddie paused, looked at him and said, well, it's a difficult one because we've not actually had official confirmation. He says, of course, I've heard the speculation, which the media are putting out there. He says, but, you know, from our perspective, we're actually in limbo because we've not actually heard. Which then prompted Razor to ask, well, does that mean he's available to play against Wolves? And he went, yep. He's trained with us, and there's a high chance that he will be available for selection. How is he? Said Razor. He said, look, you saw him against Dortmund. He came on. He did well. He was bright. Exactly how he's trained. It's the only way that I can personally judge him. It's in the background when he goes home. Obviously, you know, that we don't see him. And from our perspective, you know, we just give him all the support we can when he's at the football club. Razor then moved on, wanted to know how the other injuries were, in particular Alexander Isak and Jacob Murphy. Eddie confirmed that Alexander Isak's groin injury had resurfaced. It was the groin injury that he picked up when he was on international duty with Sweden, and he was having a scan on Friday, but he was hoping that it wouldn't be too serious. As for Jacob Murphy, then it was confirmed that it was a dislocation of the shoulder, but Jacob Murphy was seeing a specialist on Friday as well. Two different sides to that injury, said Eddie. He could have surgery, which would mean that he would be out for a considerable amount of time, or he could have he's had the shoulder pop back in. He could play with it, but they were having an assessment and seeing a specialist to decide what was going to happen, and that was on Friday afternoon. Razor then asked him, so is the squad now looking stretched? Is it thin? Is that how you're thinking? Eddie agreed that in the attacking areas, they've been hit hard. Obviously, no Isak and Murphy now to go alongside Harvey Barnes. And, you know, from his perspective, you know, at the start of the season, it looked like a deeper squad, but injuries can cause problems. And he did say this in previous press conferences. So it's nothing that he wasn't anticipating. And obviously, you know, nothing we can do about it at this moment in time. We just have to get on with it. In the positive news, Razor said Willock was back. How good was it to have Joe Willock back available for selection and you know, giving him a chance for a run out? Eddie said it's huge because it's been a long time that he's been, you know, laid off. He's an infectious character. He's got good qualities. Technically, he's very good. Yeah, you know, he runs well and he's well suited to our style of play. So yeah, great to have him back. Razor also picked out Matt Targett from the Dortmund game. Said, you know, he did well when he came on. How tough has it been for him, sitting on the sidelines for so long? Eddie then recapped basically on something he'd said in a press conference, many, many months ago, last season, where, he said, I'm sure it has been difficult for Matt. He did well in the season where, he helped us stay up the battle for survival. He then took ill before the Fulham game. Newcastle went on a winning run. And Dan Burn, who, essentially took his spot, has been a model of consistency. But yeah, he agreed. It was great to see Matt come on the other night and do so well. Reza moved on to Wolves in his final question, and he said, the results have been improving. They've got a new manager who's doing well. What's your thoughts going into the game at the weekend? And as usual, he praised their manager, Gary O'Neill. He said Gary's done a great job in a short period of time. The wins against Man City and Bournemouth were particularly impressive. They've got dangerous players, but as always, we need to prepare properly and we need to be alert to the situation. So, bog standard answer from Eddie on that. Andy Sixsmith was next. He asked him about the Dortmund game. He said, haven't watched it back yourself, which no doubt you have. What did you take from that game personally? What do you think the players took for us? He said it was a middle-of-the-road performance. For us, it wasn't our best. He said, I thought we lacked a bit in possession, which affected our transitions. But on another day, we would have scored and we would have got something out of that game. So first half wasn't good. Second half was a lot better. We live and we learn was more or less Eddie's message to that. How much of a blow is it to lose Jacob Murphy on and off the pitch? He's a big character off the pitch, of course. Eddie just agreed. He did say that if he is out, because obviously he'd made a point earlier of saying that perhaps he could play, get his shoulder popped back in, not go for the surgery option. He said if he is out, it's going to be a blow because he's such a positive person. But he is, and he's versatile as a player. But he left that one hanging, really. He just said, let's see what happens. So hopefully he was hoping for better news from the surgeon today than we're all expecting. Andy then asked him how Botman was doing. He said he was improving. He wasn't training on grass with the team at the moment, but he was training on his own and doing well. But he wasn't going to rush him back. He needed to be careful with the injury that he had. And he then touched on Elliot Anderson. He said it's a bizarre back injury. Essentially, he's going to be out for 8 weeks. There was a sharp intake of breath from everybody in the media department when we heard that, I think. And essentially 8-week layoff for Elliot Anderson. Andy then asked him about Callum Wilson, basically talking about the period of games now that he's going to have to play if Alexander Isak is going to be laid off for a game or two. Is it going to be, is he going to be up to it? A lot of people are asking. Well, Andy said, is there too much talk on Callum's fitness and not enough talk on his goal scoring prowess? Eddie said, I'd rather talk about his goal scoring, to be honest. He said he'll be disappointed about missing that chance that he had the other night, but he thought that his running against Palace was really good and he doesn't have any worries with regards to Callum Wilson in these next set of fixtures. Does the team pick itself, or will there be a few Eddie Howe surprises against Wolves? Was Andy's next question. It never picks itself. Eddie was quick to retort. He says, however, options are reduced, with the injuries in the squad, and certain things will well, it'll be what it'll be is more or less the message he was putting out there. Andy then asked him about the quirky story, as he called it, about the Borussia Dortmund bus getting a parking ticket. And Eddie, as always, manages to swerve anything controversial. Well, at least I thought he did, because he goes, I don't know, I've never heard the story. Lee Marshall, the press officer, then turns to him, explains that he'd had a parking ticket, and Eddie goes, what, at the ground? And Lee explains that it was in Tynemouth, and he goes, what's it doing there? Yeah, deserves it. And the press room all laughed. Eddie looked a bit embarrassed with the question, and they moved swiftly on to Mark from the BBC. Mark wasn't at the press conference last weekend, so didn't get a chance to ask the Tonali questions, which had already been asked last week. And he just went on a mission with Tonali questions, which I could tell was irking a little bit with Eddie. He'd already answered these last weekend. And, he more or less, his first question was, you spent a lot of money on this player. Would you have spent that money had you known, what you know now? And, he just said, look, you can't work on that hindsight element. He says, there's frustration, but, hindsight's a wonderful thing. Will the club investigate, the situation a lot closer than, now that we know what he's been accused of, what he's admitted to, and ultimately what his punishment is going to be? I'll let the club decide that, was Eddie's answer. So again, short answers, didn't really want to discuss it. Mark then perseveres and goes into a question about footballers and, gambling and, is it important that young players learn from this? Again, a question that was asked last week and was answered by Eddie. Eddie just reiterated that these pitfalls have been here for years for players. But yes, it is very important to guide your young players in a particular way to avoid these particular pitfalls. He then asked how important is it that he can train with the team. Eddie then repeated what he'd said earlier. Look, we're awaiting confirmation. We don't know what the situation is. You're all telling me that this has actually happened. However, we haven't had official confirmation yet. He then asked about covering the positions where players are injured. Looking ahead to January, are you going to end up covering positions that you didn't think you would have to? Eddie seemed relieved to get back to something other than Tonali and basically said, look, at the moment we're stretched up front, but as we've seen, things can change quickly. 1 minute you think you're okay in a department, the next moment things change. Mark then asked about Wolves. After their result against Manchester City, they drew against Aston Villa. They've had a result against Bournemouth away. Are you doubly concerned about Wolves? And Eddie just went into a bog standard answer that he gives every week. We respect all the opposition. On our day, we know we can beat anybody, but we have to perform to the best of our ability. And usual answer for that kind of question from Eddie, which was great. What is the biggest challenge with these games? Is it the rotation? Was the question that he asked next, which I thought, again was, a question which has been answered many times by Eddie at these press conferences. And again, he just said, yeah, look, obviously, from our perspective, we knew it was going to be that kind of season with these European games. That we'd have to rotate, and we've got players who have had the opportunity to come in when we've played in different cup competitions. So yeah, we always knew it was going to be a challenger season because a lot of players haven't played these kind of seasons before. So the answer was yes. He's answered that question before. Damien was next. Willock had come out and said after the Dortmund game that one of the things that got him through his long layoff was the communication that he'd had from Eddie Howe and the coaching staff. And Damien basically says, are you going to do the same with Sandro with his ban? Eddie then says, well, if he is banned, obviously he's going to have difficult times. He's going to have low times. But, communication is key. And from our perspective, we will, always communicate with our players. Damien then talked about best laid plans, you sign this guy, you couldn't have envisaged this was going to happen. Eddie just said, look, you never know what is going to happen in football. It changes day to day. Lee Ryder was next. He wanted to go down the gambling route for the first question. He basically said, when you were a player, Eddie, and many years ago, players used to turn up with the racing post. Things have changed though, and yeah, I mean, Eddie just said, look, in my career, I was coming in with the Times under my arm. He says, and players were saying, what are you doing? He says, I wasn't trying to be intellectual. Just, I used to enjoy reading the sport and I used to read other things in the Times newspaper. And, players' lives are different now, though, he says, they have a lot of spare time. They have a lot of money and rules have changed and players have got to abide by those rules. Lee then moved on to, sticking with Tonali. He basically said, there's a possibility, if he has been banned, that he might be able to train, he might be able to play in friendlies, but 10 months is a long time. How do you keep him ticking over and at the level that you need him to be? Eddie said, yeah, look, 10 months is a long time, but we need to wait for official confirmation before we can make any kind of plans. Lee then moved swiftly on to the game against Wolves, talked about last season's 1-1 and how important that had been, an important point towards Champions League qualification. Eddie talked about the game. He said, yeah, look, we did okay. He says, if I remember rightly, they really turned the pressure on, but, and thought they had the game in the bag. But obviously, there's a moment of pure magic by ASM, and, it was a wonderful goal, and it was a key game in our season. Dominic was next. He asked if Willock was ready to start in the Premier League. Eddie is always cautious when he brings players back from injury, and he was no different this time. He said it's slightly unclear at the moment if he will be. Obviously, we've taken our time with him. He didn't just have one injury. Of course, he had two. He had his hamstring, then he had his Achilles. He spent a lot of time with the sports science guys at the club, but he is fit and he is desperate to play. He then asked about Anderson and how the injury had come about, because obviously he played at Crystal Palace last week and had done particularly well. Eddie's scratching his head on this one. He said he woke up after the Palace game with a sore back and he's got no idea how it happened. And, from his perspective, he's gutted because, he's out for 8 weeks. How big a blow is it? Said Damien. And he said it's a huge blow for him and us, because this is his breakthrough season, if you like. And his versatility is so important to the squad. But yeah, it's a nightmare for him because, he was hoping to have that opportunity and play more games, and he was already doing that. Jordan then was next, and he was asking about Callum Wilson, looking ahead at the fixture list, potentially going to be without Alexander Isak for some of those games. And he asked if Callum Wilson was capable of starting the next 5 games. Yes, he is. No doubt he can do that, said Eddie. But like with all players, we analyse and his data after each game. We speak to the players directly. Coach and staff speaks to the player, and we just communicate with our players. It's as simple as that. But yes, no doubt that he could start the next 5 games if needed. Who, if any, are your emergency strikers? Found this quite interesting because he said Anthony Gordon, which of course was the answer he gave at the start of the season when he was asked who his strikers were. Would be buying a striker? He said no, and he said Anthony Gordon, Callum Wilson, Alexander Isak, and me 3 choice strikers. He then was almost as if he'd forgotten he was injured at one point. He goes Jacob Murphy, but of course he's out now, he said. Then he goes Harvey. Well, of course, Harvey Barnes, long-term injury. And then he says, and Joe Linton was signed at 9. He says, but obviously it's not ideal. Ideally we want to have our first 2 choice centre forwards, which is Alexander Isak and Callum Wilson. Jordan asked how Harvey Barnes was. Is his rehabilitation coming on? Would he be back any quicker? Said it was going well, and he would hope to get him back earlier, 100%, potentially late December, which is a big jump because they were talking about early 2024. So maybe by the sounds of it, he's picked up a couple of weeks there, which would be hugely positive for Newcastle going into the new year. Scott Wilson from the Northern Echo was next. Back on again about Sandro Tonali and why journalists insist on asking a question they've heard already. And they don't have to submit these questions. They just ask spontaneous questions. But when you've already heard what Eddie said, why suddenly waste your questions asking the stuff that we've already, asking the stuff about Tonali, which he's clearly not comfortable talking about, and he doesn't have the answers to. So he was just asking how frustrating, is it? He used the phrase Chinese whispers. He said, we're hearing lots of Chinese whispers about this, and nothing seems to have been factual. It seems to be such a confusing situation. How frustrating is it for you? And Eddie just said, look, I'm slightly removed from all of that. I focus on the training and preparation for the game. And he says, obviously, you hear little snippets here and little snippets there. He says, but I actually don't know what's going on. Other people handle that. And he says, once I know the full story, then I'll be able to handle it myself. So again, you just wanted the press to move on, which Scott took the hint and did. Champions League, he said, less time to prepare after this. You played on Wednesday. You've got to play on Saturday. Is this a more challenging game because of that. And obviously, you've got to travel away. And he went, yeah, of course it is. He said, quicker turnaround means it's harder physically and emotionally for the players. Scott jumped in and said, so there's a lot less you can do. Then he went, yeah, of course, because you've got to deal with the emotions of the previous game. The players have to deal with that, and then they've got to regain their focus and concentration and start preparing for the next game. So we have to work out how to get that information for the next game across to them in a particular way. And yeah, it's as simple as that. Our favourite, Louise Taylor, was next. Even the way she asked questions, for me, I just think if I was Eddie Howe, it would get me back up. She basically said that the Italian media has put out a statement about this suspension. This has been said, that has been said. Is there a breakdown in communications between Newcastle United and the Italians? Because we know that it's a 10-month ban and that he has to do this and he has to do that. But, so Eddie just looked, and then out of the side, Lee Marshall goes, look, Louise, the club are still waiting, for confirmation, and the club will be making no comment. And she goes, well, it seems bizarre. I mean, it's, we've reported it. It's a fact. This is what the situation is. And you're saying he can play tomorrow. And, so basically then Lee chipped in again and said, well, he's still available, Louise, and the club won't be commenting any further. Simon O'Rourke then chipped in. It wasn't his turn, but he said, so how do you feel about this, Eddie? And he goes, I can only work with facts, and until I know what is going on, then I will just concentrate on getting the team ready, getting him ready for the game tomorrow. Luke Edwards then jumped in and said, do you think you're more stretched with the squad than you expected at this stage? He confirmed, again, it was like an answer he'd already come up with earlier on, that things change quickly in every season. And, one game, before one game, you think you've got a multitude of centre forward options or forward options and everything's going well. And then you have a game where you lose a couple of players and suddenly you're struggling in that position. And he said if you look through the injury list in the Premier League at the moment, it's the same for a lot of teams and not necessarily teams that are in Europe. So yeah, Eddie's philosophical with that. You can tell, he's not gonna use injuries as an excuse because everybody gets injuries. Luke then moved on to the Dortmund game. The atmosphere was interesting because he said he's noticed on social media that there's a lot of fans having a pop at each other, criticising the atmosphere against Dortmund the other night, and wasn't as good as PSG. Eddie answered the question quite well. I thought he basically admitted that from his perspective that it was going to be difficult to recreate the atmosphere from the PSG game because that was our first game back in the Champions League. And from his perspective, he said that the second game was always going to be different, and there was no complaints from him. He thought the atmosphere was great. He also said that the team have their part to play in creating a good atmosphere. And, he just said, look, the second half was better and the crowd responded, as I expected them to do. Have your plans changed for January, said Luke. He wasn't giving anything away on this. He just said, look, I don't have any plans as yet. I've got an eye on it. We're going to need to be adjustable because, we may have a lot of forwards back by then, but then there might be injuries or suspensions in other areas. And, we've got an eye on it, but there's nothing concrete at the moment. Martin Hardy was next. Guess what he asked? Straight down the Sandro tunnel again. Is there any deadline for Sandro being able to play tomorrow? Eddie says nothing. Lee Marshall jumps in. We're awaiting confirmation, as I said earlier. And then it was like a bit of a free for all. Somebody shouted, "So who can we just clarify this? Who will we get the information of? Who is the ban going to come from?" Lee answers FIFA, but somebody shouted over the top and said, "Is it FIFA?" And he goes, "Yes." Luke Edwards then says, "Well, can you find out, Lee? Just obviously we're going to be putting some stuff out here, which is going to be out of date." time sensitive, etc. And it just became a bit of a shouting match over the top of everybody else, and you couldn't really understand what on earth was being said, other than Lee Marshall repeating what he said earlier: "We are awaiting confirmation." Somebody then asked, it was Martin, in fact, Martin Hardy, "What time are you leaving tomorrow?" Eddie then lightens the mood by saying 2 p.m. You're more than welcome to come down and wave us off, which everybody started laughing at. Then Martin asked, "Are you starting to work out like a plan of how you can help Sandro if he is banned?" Eddie said he hadn't as yet, because obviously they're awaiting confirmation. And then said, then I will need to work out a plan for him. I'll need to keep his mind fresh. Obviously need to keep him fit. We don't want him to get used to being, playing on on small pitches, etc. So there will be a program worked out specifically for him, and we will support him. And from his perspective, Eddie said, I would like him to come out this period as a better player. Martin then asked if he'd contacted him yesterday when news of the ban came through. I was expecting Eddie and Lee to chip in again, but he didn't. He just said no. Look, he's working on this with his representatives behind the scenes, and there was no need to contact him yesterday. George Culkin then was next and asked about the Champions League. He says, "You're 3 games in on the Champions League. How are you enjoying the experience?" Eddie said he was enjoying it. He says, "Games are what we are here for. The better games, the bigger the challenge. We were disappointed to lose the other night, but those kind of games you learn from, and it helps the team grow." He said, people call this the group of death, and it is it is a tight group now, but we are calm. We are ready for the next game in the Champions League, but now we have to switch back to the Premier League. And the challenges, switching your focus from Champions League to Premier League, and again, that's the first time we've had to do that. So we are enjoying the whole process. George then talked about Sandro being a tough character, should help him get through this particular period in his career. Eddie agreed, saying he is a tough character. You don't become vice captain at Milan without being that. But away from football, this is a personal life issue, and the one thing we are doing is supporting him as a club, and we're delighted as well that the fans have supported him. So that will help. That will help him massively. Kieran was one of the last ones to ask a question. He's going on about due diligence, that the club, would you say the club need to do better? Eddie shrugged that off and said, "Look, there's no way we could have known, anything about this situation. There's some things you'll never know about people's private life. That's just how it is. And there's always an element of risk when you buy a player for any club." He then asked about the Dortmund game. Did you learn anything from it? And, he said, "Yeah, look, watching teams, you watch teams, you watch your opponents, and you always learn from it." And he was then asked about the media comments made by Gary O'Neill, and he just said he takes everything with a pinch of salt that anyone says in a press conference. He says, we don't always tell the truth, and we don't always give everything away. People say things for the sake of saying things, and Luke must have pulled a surprised face. He went, "Are you surprised at that, Luke?" So a bit more humour there from Eddie. Simon was next. I don't know. I can only presume it was Simon Bird. Does Sandro owe the club an apology? Dear me, what a question that is. He just said, I won't say anything in public about it. What I say to Tonali is private. Is he the victim, or is he the problem? Said Simon. Wow, that was the last question of the press conference. It's difficult for me to comment. The circumstance he's found himself in is not a new one for football, was Eddie's answer, and that was that. So that was the press conference. I'm going to play the ads, and then I'll come back and give you a rundown on the teams and today's game. Bear with us. Give us 2 seconds. A big thanks to all our sponsors: Skips and Bins, telephone 0800 25 45 25 3, email inquiries at skipsandbins.com, website skipsandbins.com, easy contract free and pay-as-you-go waste collection. Thanks to Mr. Vicky Sauces, handmade in Cumbria.
You can find out more about them from their website, mrvickies.co.uk, or by calling 01768 210 102. Thanks to Media Arts for all the help with the video side of things. And thanks to United Group Travel, UK coach holiday firm based in Morpeth. There's no strangers on their tours, just people you haven't met yet. They're now taking bookings for 2024. You can call 01670 632 460, 0791 666 4174, or 07957 141 654, or go to the website unitedgrouptravel.com. Please subscribe to the channel. Hit the subscribe button underneath the video today. We still do 7 shows a week. Hit the thumb up under the video to like it. It does us a big favour. Click share to share to your other social media and let people know about NUFC matters. We're also a podcast. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, and other podcast providers. If you want to help the show financially, you can take out a £25 one-off membership. You get a scarf, a pen, a cup, and a membership card. How do you get it? Go to nufcmatters.com, look for membership. If you've got a smartphone, then put your smartphone over the QR code and it will take you straight to that section on the website. We also support the food bank on this channel. You can donate to the food bank today by going to nufcfansfoodbank.co.uk. We do support events on this channel as well. If you've got an event, please send it in and we'll promote it. The Tyne Theatre and Opera House are doing a Keegan, Beardsley and Waddle event, the Class of 84, 25th of January 2024. Book now by calling 0844 249 1000. And the Tyneside Irish Centre, they're doing an event with Frank Clark and John Gibson on Thursday, December the 7th. You can get tickets from nufcmatters.com and they are priced at £15. There's also some tickets available on Groupon. Don't forget, you can catch me 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, with Rye, Dave and Daz on the Northeast Footy Brekkie Show, 7 till 9, and you can catch us on the Red, the Toon and the Cat and on Toon Radio's website. WhatsApp us on the day 0330 043 2002, the perfect way to start your day.
Okay, Newcastle United travel to Molineux today. It's a 5:30 kickoff. It is live on Sky Sports in the Premier League. And Eddie Howe side go into the game unbeaten in their last 5 Premier League games, knowing that victory will take them on to 1,500 points in that competition. All 3,000 away tickets are now sold out. And in keeping with all Premier League games over this weekend, there's going to be a minute's applause before kickoff in memory of the late Sir Bobby Charlton. Okay, we've discussed with the press conference the team news already. Harvey Barnes and Sven Botman continue to miss out. Alexander Isak, Jacob Murphy and Elliot Anderson all will be unavailable due to various injuries. Isak's anticipated to be out potentially until after the November international break with a reoccurrence of his groin problem. Murphy with his shoulder and Anderson with his back are going to be sidelined for longer, but unconfirmed periods at this moment in time. At the time of recording this podcast, a plane bound for Sandro Tonali was expected to have commenced, but formal confirmation was yet to appear before we recorded this. Joe Willock is in line to make his first Premier League appearance of the season after he had made an appearance against Dortmund the other night. And don't forget, Bruno Guimaraes is 1 booking away from serving an automatic 1-match ban if he reaches 5 yellow cards in the Premier League. As for Wolves, Hugo Bueno is missing due to injury. Mario Lemina and Nelson Semedo will both be available because they have now completed their suspensions. Gary O'Neill's side are unbeaten in the last 3 Premier League outings. They've had a 2-1 win over Manchester City, a 2-1 away win at Bournemouth, and a 1-1 draw with Aston Villa at Molineux. Referee at Molineux today is Anthony Taylor. This will be the first game that he'll have taken charge of a Newcastle match since our 3-1 Premier League home win over Southampton in April. As for VAR, well, that is being run by Jared Gillette. Okay, if you're going to Wolves today, Paul Scunnymag has all the info you will need.
Hi folks, Scunnymag Paul here. We've got Wolves at the weekend. It's coming up. There's plenty of car parking around the ground. You can book the club ones through the club website itself, but they do go pretty fast. Your council car parks, it's strongly advised to book those in advance. There's usually a lot of road closures around the ground, making it difficult to get into and out of some of those, but there's very limited street parking, so my advice would be get booked in somewhere if you're driving down. There's an Asda just north of the ground. Don't park in there, you will get a ticket. If you're coming in on the coaches, you'll get dropped off closer to the stadium. There is a fan zone with a mix of supporters. It opens about 2.5 hours before kickoff. You can get food and drink and that in there. I can't speak personally because I've not used it myself. I tend to go to the designated away pub, which is the Blue Brick. It is just behind the train station, so it's handy for people coming out on train. You're going to be needing Wolverhampton train station if you are doing that. You come out of the train station, turn right, go right under the railway bridge, and it's just on your right next to the Premier Inn. But I've been doing a little bit of digging, and there is a second pub that will allow away fans in. It's aimed at the older generation, I think. It's what used to be the platforms of the original train station, so it's railway themed. It's called the Great Western, after the Great Western Railways, and you've got loads of train memorabilia around there. It serves real ale, and they do it well. This is also going to mean you're not going to find a cheap pint of lager in there. So lager and singing, Blue Brick, relaxing pint of real ale in a mixed atmosphere, the Great Western. The Blue Brick is Whiskey Victor 10, 0 Bravo Alpha, with your 3 words of handed epic salsa. And the Great Western, just along the back of the train station, is at Whiskey Victor 10, 0 Delta Golf, and larger, older towns. Because it's the only designated pub, they are pretty well set up for a match day. They have lots of staff on, but it's packed. You're going to be queuing. If you're thinking of staying over, the Premier Inn is probably the best for away fans, with it being right on the doorstep of the Blue Brick. And that's got the same postcode, Whiskey Victor 10, 0 Bravo Alpha. And your 3 words to get into the reception is baked salad, which sounds like a revolting lunch. Once you're ready to head up the ground, you're going to be in the East Stand, which is the Steve Bull stand. You'll head up from the ring road with the stadium in front of you, head down the right hand side of it. You'll go a little over halfway down, and then you'll be able to filter down into the outer cordon where there'll be searches and ticket checks in place. It's like a 3-stage thing to get through before you actually get into the stadium. And your 3 words for that first check area is them passes finishing. Have a cracking day. I've been Paul. Take care. You come out of the train station, turn right, go right under the way under the.
Paul did ask me to leave that little blooper in there. It just shows we're all human, Paul. Don't worry about it, mate. Thanks, as always, for that. And if you bear with us, as always, we've got Tyne Stato, who gives us his views on the game. As always, it goes out first on the 3 amigos. But here is Tyne Stato.
Hello, Wolverhampton away on Saturday, a game that I'm going to see live tomorrow afternoon. What are the stats showing us? In 16 games in the Premier League, Newcastle has won 4 and lost only 2. This means that there are the record 10 draws between the two teams. Actually, in Wolverhampton in particular, there are 6 1-1 draws, 1 win for Newcastle by 2-1, and 1 defeat by Wolverhampton by 2-1, that famous last game under Ashley's ownership. When it comes to Newcastle, we are 5 games unbeaten in the Premier League, with 4 wins, with all of them coming with clean sheets. Wolverhampton on their own are on a run of 4 games without a defeat, which is their best performance in the league since January 2022. Newcastle are the top scorers in the division with 24 goals, and they lead also on XG, converted chances, chances created, and they're an attacking threat overall. Callum Wilson has scored 5 goals only for 330 minutes, which makes it a goal every 66 minutes, which is the best ratio in the Premier League. Kieran Trippier with 6 assists leads the Premier League rankings, but also Pedro Neto from Wolverhampton has 6 assists so far this season, and he's on track to beat the record for an assist per season by an Wolverhampton player. So far, this is Adama Traore with 9, 3 years ago. Let's see what happens on Saturday after a bruising game against Borussia Dortmund in midweek, but I believe in the let's go for the win.
Thank you very much to Tyne Stato, and thanks to you for watching. Thanks to the moderators. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Going to be quite a packed week this week with pre-recorded shows, as I am unavailable to do lives for most of the week. But enjoy the game. I am going for a 1-1 draw. Stick your predictions down in the chat below, and we will be back on Sunday with the professionals. That one is live at about 6:30, 7 o'clock. Fans Forum is on Monday, pre-recorded. That will be at 6 o'clock. But keep an eye out. Make sure you subscribe to get notifications for each show this week. But there will be a show every night for you. Take care. NUFC matters. It really does.